For Politics PA and Broad and Liberty, my name is Steve Ulrich. Thank you for joining us today in another of our Keystone Candidate Forum series. We're pleased to be joined by the House Republican leader, Representative Bryan Cutler, and the President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, Luke Bernstein. Luke, I'll give you the first question.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be with you today. Thank you very much, Leader Cutler, for being with us.
Welcome.
Major election just in a few weeks here. If Republicans take back the majority in the state house, right now we know that the state house is very close with the Democrats having a 1-seat majority. The state Senate is very close with Republicans having a 3-seat majority, and we have a Democratic governor. If Republicans were to win back the state house here in this upcoming election, what would your priorities be from a Republican caucus if Republicans do take that majority?
Well, I think you could look at the current session, and I think everybody would agree it's been really unproductive in terms of actual output. In fact, I think the governor signed the lowest number of bills ever. When you contrast that with 19 and 20 session, when the Republicans controlled both chambers, we had one of the most productive sessions ever prior to COVID. So that's really kind of the vision that we would cast. The issues that we would cover would center around many of the amendments that we've tried to offer on the floors and many of the legislative packages that we've announced through a series of press conferences and editorial boards and discussions. So it would be crime and public safety. It'd be inflation. Energy would be a huge component of that. When you look at the energy costs, that literally impacts everything, from transportation costs to get our goods places to the price of our electricity bills when we turn on the switch. So we have to have a good Pennsylvania-focused energy-first policy that would lower costs. And then we're also going to take a look and continue some of the work that we've done in terms of higher education reform and ensuring that we train the workforce for tomorrow that many of your members need. And we're looking to make sure that every individual has an opportunity. One of our pillars has been, having an education system that really meets the students' needs. Many times in Harrisburg, we discuss money and we discuss buildings, but we don't actually discuss the students. So we're looking for a child-centered and family-focused plan there as well.
Yeah, I think many times the reform piece gets lost. I think people focus a lot on the funding aspects, but reforming some of the systems, whether it be in higher education, in basic education, and even in childcare, reforming some of the system helps move us forward. So I guess one follow-up question I would have for you, assuming Republicans do take back the House, and there would be a Republican majority in the House and Senate, there would still be a Democratic governor. How would you, and the margins in any scenario are going to be very close. How would you feel, how would you best approach that in working with, knowing that the governor will be the opposite party? How do you think you'd be able to get things done in a divided government?
Well, particularly in the school issue, in the education world, the governor has already voiced his support for school choice. And that's obviously been a priority for our caucus and the Senate for some time. We've passed different versions, and we've even made progress on that issue under Governor Wolf. And, look, it's no secret that the governor, the prior governor, Governor Wolf, and myself, we had some pretty big policy differences. Despite that, we were still able to be successful. We were able to kind of turn the financial ship around in terms of our surpluses and actually put money in the rainy day fund. We were able to increase the EITC program for educational opportunities. We were able to invest in the workforce. And I'd approach Governor Shapiro in the same manner, quite frankly. I have a history of having worked with him in the House previously. We had some overlap in terms of our tenure there. So there is a relationship. And we would just be real honest with each other about what can I get the votes for and what would he be willing to sign. And that would be the general approach. It's what we use in 19 and 20. We've proven that it can work, and we're looking forward to doing it again when we retake the majority.
Okay, thanks.
Let me ask about higher education and the 4 state-related Pennsylvania universities and the rising costs that affect parents as they look to send their children to college. Is there anything that can be done in Harrisburg to help out parents as they look at whether it's going to be Penn State, Pitt, Temple, Lincoln, will it be one of the private colleges and universities around the Commonwealth?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own educational journey because that obviously has kind of informed my view on the higher education system. And quite frankly, it's the advice that I gave my own children. I have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. The 21-year-old just started X-ray school, so that's a trade school like I went to. My 19-year-old is a junior at Millersville, and he's studying biology pre-med. So the bottom line is this, and this really gets into the child-centered and family-focused portions of our platform. we all learn different. So not everybody is necessarily on a track to go to college right away. I went to a trade school first. I did 2 years in a trade school. Then I was out for a couple of years. Then I went back for my bachelor's, was out for a couple of years, then went back to law school. And my wife followed a similar path. She went from being an LPN to an RN to a BSN to a nurse with a master's in healthcare administration. And now she's in a doctoral program. So we have kind of done those career paths. And I think that's a much better approach, because oftentimes when you look at the colleges in terms of their current offerings, the 4-year graduation rate is not as good as it should be, because oftentimes students change their minds. They determine they like something else better and they've got to switch some classes. And, not everybody is laser focused on what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So I think we have to recognize that in our current system. I think it's great that, some students choose to go into the workforce right away. They pick a trade, then they might go get a business degree to own their own business in that. That's the kind of entrepreneurship that we want to inspire. So in terms of, families making those decisions now, I think it's important. And, some of my former colleagues, specifically Leader Reed, always talked about this. Like, every parent wants their kid to have a better opportunity than they had. So, when you look at that, oftentimes it's the parents who are pushing the kids to college more so than the students themselves. So I think we have to have real discussions with our kids as well to understand what they're interested in and what's the best pathway to get there. The other option is, very truthfully, there's lots of opportunities to go to school at lower or reduced costs, based on academics, possibly athletics, although as we were discussing off camera, that's not necessarily a rock solid plan for many of the schools. But there's opportunities. You can join ROTC, you can join the military, you could join a public service area of service where you could ultimately get your education paid for. Myself, I was fortunate that my employer actually paid me to finish my bachelor's degree up to a certain amount. So I had to front the money. I had to get a certain grade in order to get refunded, but there was skin in the game on both sides there. So I think it's important that we explore all the options and understand that not everybody is on a fast track directly to college. Now, some students, that's perfect. Like my son, he had 55 credits before he graduated high school. So he only has to go a total of 3 years to finish his degree. And so it's great that he's that focused. He understands what he wants. But I'm also of the belief, he may find something else in the biology world that he finds more interesting than possibly going to medical school. So there has to be a degree of flexibility. That was the one thing, despite my law degree, when my kids talked to me about possibly going eventually for advanced stuff, I said, I'm not going to let you go for a pre-med or just a pre-law degree. I said, you have to actually get a skill or a degree that is marketable outside of that particular area. And that's something that, unfortunately, I kind of learned myself by virtue of my own pathways with my family situation, with my dad passing away early on and my mom being terminally ill. And, I was just talking to my sister last night. She lives in Salt Lake City, Utah. She had a similar path. She went to RN, then BSN, and now she has a master's in healthcare human resources, and she's working, over the University of Salt Lake Health Systems, and she's doing a fantastic job. Very proud of her. Professionally, she's, really.
Can we get her back? How do you recruit her back home to PA?
I've tried. The good news is her daughter, who wrestles, my niece, is looking at possibly coming to Penn State as she kind of progresses her wrestling career.
There we go.
I would love that.
We can recruit her back home. I do want to follow up on one thing you said, because I see this all over. When you talked about your 21-year-old going in an X-ray school, I hear employable.
Yep.
I hear gainfully employed. I hear long-term opportunities. When other people hear that and they hear not going to college, there has become a stigma that I think it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still out there. And you're a great testament to someone who did not start in a traditional 4-year school. How do we get through that barrier? Because when I'm hearing trade schools, when I'm hearing going and getting a skill, I'm hearing someone can set themselves up for long-term success, but that's not the norm. That's not what many people think when they hear that. How do we break down that barrier and that stigma so we can encourage kids of tomorrow to go get skills and be employable in today's workforce? Workforce continues to be the number one challenge for every business. And we're not having enough kids go into that space. So how do we remove that stigma?
Well, unfortunately, I encountered that stigma myself. My senior year in high school, as I mentioned earlier, my father passed away. My mom was sick. So I made the decision I wasn't going to go to college and that I would get a trade. And I knew that nursing wasn't the path that I wanted. And then I ultimately settled on X-ray because I was interested in the math and the physics that's associated with it. And when I went and told my guidance counselor that, I'll never forget, because I graduated ninth in my high school class. She said, you have to go to college. That was the stigma that was kind of there, that it was a trade school. Because at the time, it wasn't even an associate's degree. It was just a opportunity to sit for the national license. That was it. It was about 6 credits probably short of an associate's degree. Now it is an associate's degree program. That's what my daughter's enrolled in. And Cheyenne's doing really good in her first semester. And what's exciting about that opportunity, and gets back to the kind of the parental involvement, right. I knew that path worked. So that's something that I was personally very comfortable with. It's something that I talk about quite a bit, because I think that, in her case, she works for the hospital. The hospital will pay for her school because they want her as an X-ray tech. Like, they're developing their own staff in-house. So, she has that opportunity now to get a career that is very employable, very portable, unfortunately, as well. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to make sure, that she stays in Pennsylvania and, really, kind of provide that pathway and make sure that they have opportunities to be employed. And if you do that, I think that people naturally stay here. I think long term, we've got to come to grips with the fact that for the last 10 censuses, we have lost representation in Congress. Yeah. Our population has stagnated, and we're losing. Our number one export for too long has been our young degreed professionals. Because when you look at how the old education system was not just set up, but how we funded it, individuals would get degrees, but the employers here would say, we need these skill sets. Then we act surprised when these people move to get jobs. So that was something that we started under Governor Wolf. I've seen it continue with Governor Shapiro. We've got to better align that, because if we incentivize those areas that we need, they're much more likely to stay here. Right. Because, they've already put roots down in school. They've decided they like it here. Perhaps they like the city that the college is in, or the social life, or whatever it is. And I think we've got some great cities in the Commonwealth, rich in history, rich in culture, and we've got great educational institutions. So we just have to figure out how to keep more of those students here. We're good at starting businesses. We're not necessarily good at keeping them, particularly in the life sciences and the biotech world. It's one of the reasons why at the end of last session, we passed the life science biotechs credit. And, with the idea that, what happens is they'll start it here, they'll do their initial research, but when they go to scale, they end up going to Boston, or they go down to the Research Triangle in many times. So we have to figure out a way to kind of bridge that gap. Part of that is workforce. When you go back to the Amazon bid, this was going back several years now. Mm-hmm. One of their number one concerns was the pipeline of tech workers that we could provide on the long term. And here's the neat part about, if we could fix that problem and we can provide those individuals with the workforce that they actually need, and that's what we're incentivizing and funding in the budget, we're going to fix our congressional population bleed as well. We should set as a goal, we need to increase our representation in Congress. We want our population to grow. We want our young folks to stay here and to raise their families here, because that will ultimately be what's best for our economy.
One of the challenges for businesses coming to the Commonwealth, not only corporate taxes, but obviously permitting. Reform.
Absolutely.
I kind of told you we were going in that direction. Your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think everybody agrees that permitting needs to be fixed. One of the things I say on the House floor all the time, and I do believe this, many times we identify the same problems. We open with the education world. The Democrats, generally as a caucus position, they have the worldview that if we simply spend more money, that would fix the problem, leaving out the reforms. And sometimes even, we might rely too much on reforms. And I think there's some middle ground there where we could target the reforms that we want with the reforms that we need. And then we could make sure that we produce those students. In the permitting world, everybody knows it's a problem. Luke, I know you had that great example of the housing project. I'd love for you to share that, and we could actually kind of walk through it, because we ran into something similar.
Yeah, there are two real big ones that you think about. U.S. Steel that went to Arkansas because of permitting. The governor stood there in Arkansas and said, the reason U.S. Steel is coming to Arkansas instead of Pittsburgh is because they will cut the ribbon on this facility before they'll even get a permit in Pennsylvania. And that played out in another example where there's a housing project that was set up to go in Wilmington, Delaware, and in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And the mayor in Wilmington cut the ribbon as Lancaster continued to work through the permitting process. And so for us, when we're talking about affordable housing, when we're talking about opportunities to grow and expand jobs, every day that's delayed is a day that people are not working. It's a day that we're not getting our economy moving. It's a day that projects in progress are coming to a halt. So permitting, how do we continue to move forward a permitting process? We made some significant headway this year, but it's not to the level of some of what we ultimately need. So we need to keep building on that success. How do you see that process playing out? Because it is a huge barrier. Encina is an example that just left. That's a third one. So our own policies and permitting should not prevent our economy from moving forward. How do we address that?
Well, there's a couple things. One, the average wait time for a permit in the region that I live in, South Central, is about 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. And no business will wait that long and tie up capital for that long when they could, in fact, go somewhere else. In fact, there's literally an example right across the state line. We have a natural gas-fired plant that's probably 100 yards inside Maryland. Now, the pipeline runs through Pennsylvania. And they located there because of the proximity to the transformers and access to the grid and the water that's in the river. But we had the same kind of site in Pennsylvania just across the border. They chose not to go there, and in large part, it's because the permitting is such a problem. So when you look at that, I think everybody agrees it's too long. The idea of getting your money back is great, but all the people that I've talked to, they actually want their permit.
That's right, and I think that sets the right tone in terms of the message. But no business wants to sit out and put the permit. They're applying for a permit because they want the permit.
Right.
They're putting the money up because they want the permit. They don't want their money back. They want to invest and grow jobs here.
And many of them that I've talked to, in fact, would actually pay extra if they could have a guaranteed time window. So there's some things I think that we could do. One, there's some areas, particularly in the NPDES world, where we are more stringent than the federal government. That makes no sense.
So for those that don't know what that is, walk through NPDES.
Well, it deals with the amount of land that you disturb on the surface. And Representative Dave Zimmerman actually has the bill. The acreage that you're allowed to disturb under the federal rules is significantly larger than what we have here. And because of that, that adds a whole nother layer of permitting then that you have to deal with, which is a huge
problem. If it's good enough for the EPA,
it should be good.
You think it'd be good enough in Pennsylvania.
And look, nobody's accused Maryland of all states of being soft on the environment. The truth is they turn their or New York, by the way, who I think has a 90-day turnaround. So when you look at those two states, they're protecting the environment, but they're doing it in an expedited way. The example that I always give is, as a lawyer, when I submit something to court, I sign at the end of the brief, and you're attesting to a couple things. One is the fact that there is actually a claim contained in your documents that you're filing, and you're putting your license on the line and saying, not only is there a claim, I have the facts that actually support that claim. And we don't treat engineers that way. We have engineers submit their documents. They float around for a little bit. They get kicked back for a list of deficiencies. And I've talked to way too many business owners who they get a list, they get 10 things, they fix it, they send it back, and it comes back 90 days later with a list of 12 new things. Mm-hmm. And that kind of ping-ponging and lack of ownership is a problem. So I think if you would go to the federal standards, you'd have less by the very nature. And then you would also be able to focus on those areas that are problems. I would love to see, presumptively approved permits and then allow for the inspection to happen. And then if you've done something wrong, it's your license that you signed to. I think that would make sense.
Yep.
Because you could at least get the project going.
And there's accountability there. And we have that in other parts of our society. I always talk about at PennDOT. PennDOT does not inspect cars. Right. A third-party auto shop would come in, you'd get your car inspected, then you drive out of the auto body. If the wheels fall off, there's a legal process. Right. To handle that. If there's a situation, there would be a legal process to handle that. So that's how do you see? So do you feel that would be a priority if
Absolutely.
if Leader Cutler right now in the Republican side becomes Speaker Cutler. Is that a priority you see for the caucus in a new legislative session?
It would be. In fact, we'd passed it the last session that we were in the majority under Leader Benninghoff. And it was a project, series of bills. Some of the other areas, and I want to hit on them real quick, but I do want to come back to the permitting one. The idea of having some kind of REINS Act to, ensure that regulations that are unnecessary are in fact being removed. We have for some time, I've personally advocated for, and we've actually included in our rules, the Government Oversight Committee back in 19 and 20. Obviously, it's not been as active because all of session is a little slower this session, but there's an opportunity there to do some regulatory oversight. A lot of folks aren't aware that each one of our committees actually has jurisdiction over the regulations that deal with certain titles and chapters of laws that come through their committees. So as those regulations are promulgated, we're given notice. We need to do a better job of following that up. We've been fairly active in comments on many of the regs. So that's an opportunity. We're looking at having an individual become kind of a regulatory oversight person who they would spearhead that with our campaign, our committee chairs. And then we would really do a campaign to lower the total number of regulations. I think that was probably one of the biggest successes under the previous Trump administration, was the idea that for every regulation that came in, we're getting rid of some. Because when you look at our regulations, and I'll go back to when we worked with the Corbett administration on the hospital regs. It made no sense that we had inspectors come in, they would do the state inspection, and then 6 months later, and this is something that I noticed as an employee, 6 months later, the federal government would come in through joint accreditation, and they'd essentially do the same survey. Right. And it was just slightly different patient files, and but both times it would take multiple days to do it. So we worked on, and Governor Corbett signed a bill called deemed licensure. If you meet the federal standards, you're done. And then the magic of that approach is the department actually gets to spend more time on the actual enforcement of the law. Right now, it's just checking boxes and processing paperwork. That doesn't get projects in the ground. That doesn't get people houses that they can afford. So if we can actually flip the presumption and go from you need our permission to let us help you succeed, I think that the possibilities are endless, because that will open up business opportunities, which will then further drive the jobs market, which will then further focus the educational market to make sure we get the workforce that we need. And so there's a huge opportunity there. We've got to get, and the governor's, he's voiced support of permitting reform. So it's my hope that we could have some productive discussions in that world, because you could go through and remove the unnecessary regs. You could expedite the permitting process with guaranteed approval time windows, even if it comes at a higher price, because I think, quite frankly, many people would actually pay for that because they need the predictability of the timeline, not the openness of the process.
Wanted to ask a little bit about the minimum wage in the Commonwealth and also paid family leave, two things that certainly affect families around the Commonwealth. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's actually been a lot of discussion on that. And again, this is an area where the two caucuses disagree a little bit in terms of the approach. The truth is there's little to very few people who actually still pay minimum wage here in the Commonwealth. And, all of my kids started north of $10 an hour at some jobs, locally. So the market has moved beyond what our minimum wage is. So that really lends itself to two discussions. One is, well, then what harm does it do to move it up? But the question is where do you put it? Here's the one thing that I know. Anytime that the government tries to guess, they generally get it wrong. So I think, the market, I stopped at a Sheetz. I was out and back to the mid-state yesterday out to Johnstown. So I visited Sheetz, and then I visited Rutgers closer to home. And both of them had positions posted for, I think it was $16.50. So obviously that's not a minimum wage job. And now we can have a discussion about what we want our workforce to look like, because I think if you have those career pathways, the possibilities are endless. And that's where I want to focus, is those higher paying jobs, because it'll naturally pull people into those careers. And, even with an entry-level position, but if it's one that gets you an education and a different skill set, that's an opportunity, I think. It's what I did. It's what my daughter's doing. And I think that there's some wisdom in that approach. The paid family leave one, my biggest concern with that proposal was they wanted to put it in the Department of Labor, who already couldn't handle the unemployment situation. It was, a debacle in terms of the COVID money that went through there. One of the most ironic contacts that we got during COVID was we had believe it was the majority leader of the North Carolina House call our office and said, well, he goes, I really appreciate it, but I was never employed in your state. I'm returning this check that the unemployment system is sending. So obviously he was a victim of fraud. And, it took a long time to unwind that. Even he'd never lived here. It wasn't, real, but the system failed. And, part of that was due to the large volume, but part of that was just due to the antiquated nature of the system. So I don't know that they could handle a new Paid Family Leave Act. And quite frankly, in talking to many of the employers, ourselves included as a caucus, like we have changed some of our employee policies to make them more employee friendly. It includes work from home. It includes some different work hours, different things that we have in terms of options. So again, the market, I think, is kind of getting ahead of where the government's trying to aim. And the last thing I want to do is aim behind where we're already at.
I think the challenge that we see from an employer perspective is we're trying to set an overall environment that will encourage job growth and job creation. And once you can get a job, allowing someone, it's more than just a job. It can set up a career long term. And some of the things in the policies and the two that we've talked about in this recent example, whether it be minimum wage or paid family leave, the private sector, in many cases, you talked about some of the wages above, significantly above the current minimum wage. In the paid family leave, where would we do if you have a company that might only have 3 employees and they leave? What is their job then guaranteed when they come back? How do we work through that? And in other cases, sometimes there are really generous policies that employers in the marketplace is putting forward. Do they say, well, now that if this is the standard, I'm actually going to take away some benefits for some employees because here's the standard? I think what we've found is, by and large, because it's such a competitive marketplace for workforce, the private sector is largely figuring it out. And this specific employer is figuring out how to do this and how to operate. And so that's what we're seeing. More regulations, I think, cause great concern because it's just a one-size-fits-all approach in an environment where that has not been viewed as successful in many cases.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example because, many of the employers that I worked at, they offered short-term disability. So that would be kind of that paid family leave option in many cases. Or one employer that I worked at actually got rid of the concept of sick days necessarily. And then they just gave us more vacation days and it was up to us to manage it, which I liked because I was rarely out for an illness. So it actually gave me an extra day or two of vacation time. So, and that was 20 years ago.
Sure.
So, the employers, I think, employers want to take care of their employees because that's what ensures their success. That's one of the things I did when I was in management at the hospital. It's one of the things I've done now in the caucus is focus on our employees because they are the ones who do the hardest work that, quite frankly, so few people see. I'm here on the podcast and we're talking issues, but the truth is I've got a great team behind me. And that's important. And any business who doesn't recognize the value of their own employees won't be in business for very long.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things that, we talked about in terms of moving forward is just how tight the any majority would be. How do you think, and you had talked about the ability to work across the aisle and work with folks. How do you think even getting to 102 in a new a legislative session would be? And how would you propose starting to work with both in your caucus and maybe others on some key issues that would help the economy move forward?
Well, I think, one, it involves listening to each other and understanding where people can be and like what can they support. One of the things I encourage new members to do is always kind of share their stories. Like what's your why? Why did you run for office? Because when you understand somebody's why, it helps you to understand how they process information and really what drives them. And we did that in 19 and 20. We had a record number of bills that passed. And I think that and this surprises a lot of folks, I think it was 94% had bipartisan support and 65% were unanimous. And if you remember back to 19 and 20 heading into COVID, that was not the easiest of times. There was a lot of political divisiveness. There was a lot of really just conflict on some big issues, but yet we worked on insurance, we worked on voting laws, we worked on farm and food aid and affordable housing and permitting reform. And, we were able to find this solution. So the first part is talking to each other and listening. We had regular meetings with the Senate. When I was leader the last time, we would, we still do that now, but obviously it's a slightly different approach in terms of the meetings, just because we're in the minority. In the majority, they would increase in regularity, and they would also increase in terms of focus. And once we understand what everybody's goals is, I mean, the governor's been clear. He's in favor of a couple of things that I think that we can find consensus on. School choice, permitting reform, business tax environment. All of those, I think, are very achievable, even with thin majorities, because if those issues would actually come to the floor, it's going to have strong bipartisan support.
Let me ask one final question. We'll wrap things up here. And this is from my background. Is there any discussion in your chamber about name, image, and likeness and how it affects athletes at Penn State, Pitt, Temple, but all across the country?
Yeah, there has been.
Do you want a Cutler jersey? Is that why maybe
nobody's buying
it?
As long as I don't have to have a Dickinson jersey, we're good.
That's right. We need Dickinson jerseys out here.
So between Dickinson, Franklin, Marshall, Lebanon Valley. Anyway, we continue.
We have a lot of ground covered here.
We actually have dealt with that issue a couple times. I think 2 different bills we had passed in order to comply with the NCAA requirements. I think that's going to be ongoing. Mm-hmm. I know that, watching the national news, there's a lot of discussion in terms of, what is exactly the right mix between the school and the students, and what does that look like? So I don't think it's solved, but I definitely think we're going to have to keep an open mind on that as we go forward.
Yeah, I think in even to that point, I think the transfer portal opening for unlimited transfer windows with NIL hitting the same time has really brought this issue to the forefront. And so different states are weighing in and others. So I think there does have to be some type of discussion on what is the best for the student athlete. Right. And what's fair. And so those are the 2 things I think that, whether it be in the state legislature and others. And I think this is another issue where, because the federal government has just fallen down on solving the big issues of our day, you look at data security. I mean, so many issues we didn't even talk about today. Data security and data privacy, intellectual property, these things with AI that are coming in. Because the federal government has not put forward real solutions, it's been a patchwork in the states, and NIL is just another example of that.
Well, the AI thing is actually huge. When you look at the recently announced deal to reopen 3 Mile Island, which is great for the local economy. But I wanted to step back for a minute, because this is a huge issue on the horizon. The idea that we had a nuclear power plant that I think it was 800,000 homes, I think is what they had previously supported with that. It's going to support 1 data center, 1. And, when you look at a lot of the tech companies and what they're saying, they're going to need in terms of the number of data centers. And by the way, we have a pretty competitive data center set of laws for the Commonwealth. So it's very likely that they'll be looking here. Right now, we are a net exporter of energy. TMI is going to come back on to support 1 of those. Grid stability as we go into
saying that point, we are a net exporter. You're saying Pennsylvania,
not a net exporter. And when you look at that on the horizon, as more of those get built, that's going to increase demand. While at the same time, this is another good example where the federal government's just completely failed. They're increasing the EV standards. So they want more people to plug into the grid. So we're driving demand through the roof, while at the same time not giving the permits for them to actually build the plants to supply the electricity that they're telling everybody they need. That we've seen that in the markets. Everybody's seen their electricity bills spike considerably in the last couple of years. That will be a defining issue in the next session.
And unfortunately, we've had a wonderful conversation, but we have to leave it there. Our thanks to House Republican Leader Bryan Cutler, Luke Bernstein, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. My name is Steve Ulrich. Thank you for joining us on our Keystone Candidate Forum. For Politics PA and Broaden Liberty, in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, this is the Keystone Candidate Forum. My name is Steve Ulrich. I'm the managing editor of Politics PA. I'm joined by Alex Halper, Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber. And Alex, today we're fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with the Auditor General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Tim DeFoor.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. Tim DeFoor won his first election to Auditor General 4 years ago. I think many Pennsylvanians, many political pundits were surprised at his victory at the time. Over the last few years, he has been an active Auditor General, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
He's the first Republican to win the office since 1997 and the first person of color to hold statewide office in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our interview with Auditor General Tim DeFoor comes up in just a moment. You're watching the Keystone Candidate Forum on Voices of Reason. For Politics, PA, and Broad and Liberty, this is the Keystone Candidate Forum. My name is Steve Ulrich. I'm joined by Alex Halper, the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. And we're pleased to be joined today by the Auditor General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Tim DeFoor. Tim, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great being here.
I want to give you the opportunity to explain to us why you are running again, why you want a second term as Auditor General in the state of Pennsylvania.
It's really simple. I care. I care about government. I care about the employees within the Department of the Auditor General, but also I care about the entities that we audit. And I'm going to go back to when I was a kid. My parents used to always talk to me and my siblings about government, about what government did for families like ours, what was to be expected of our government leaders. And they used to always talk about their taxes. And I knew as a young adult, young man, I knew what I wanted to do. Now, nobody aspires to be an auditor. I aspired to be in law enforcement, where I could investigate and go after people who were basically stealing from the government by getting something they weren't entitled to. And I had the opportunity to do that within the Department of the Inspector General, then ultimately within the Department of the Attorney General. And it's because of those conversations with my parents that I actually started to really care about how government operated, because government impacts everybody. It impacts everybody in this Zoom call. It impacts my neighbors. It impacts me. And I felt that I had a unique opportunity to help improve government by focusing on the issues that impacted government. And if there were any issues that impacted government, what was the best way to resolve those issues without directly attacking individuals who you were looking at, either through an investigation or either through an audit. So throughout my career, if you look at my career, going back to the time when I was with the Inspector General's office, in my very brief political career, which has only been with the Dauphin County Controller and as Auditor General, my career has been consistent. And that consistency has been assuring that there is, in rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse in government, making sure that programs that are funded by Pennsylvania taxpayers are in fact working, but also making sure that the people who are doing the employees, making sure that they have the tools that they needed to also do the job. Because our employees currently are there 37 and a half hours a week. And for those 37 and a half hours a week, I want to make sure that they're happy. And the only way to find out if they're happy is to speak to them. And whatever we do within a department, it cannot be my decision alone. It has to be ours as a whole. If the employees are the ones doing the work, then we need to listen to the employees as opposed to telling them what to do. So it's for those reasons, in my unique experience doing the work that I have been doing my entire career, I believe I'm the person best served to be the Auditor General. And that's why I would love, and it's up to the voters, would love a second term so we could changes that we've made so they can become part of the Attorney Generals for the next decade.
Auditor General DeFoor, it is really great to have you on the program, and we appreciate you making the time. You mentioned how government impacts everybody, and that's certainly a statement that I agree with. And on behalf of our 10,000 business members around the state, I think they would absolutely agree with you. Government impacts their bottom lines, their ability to operate. I'm curious, we don't always think about the Auditor General in terms of impacting employers, impacting the economy of Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania's competitiveness. Can you talk a little bit about over your last 4 years in this position, how the Office of the Auditor General interacts with the business community and what impact you're able to have on our economy in general?
And that's a good question. I mean, number one, if there is a program, and we're talking about state-funded programs, if or it could be a department that impacts business or a program that impacts business. Our job is to make sure that those programs are working the way that they're supposed to work. Those programs that ultimately impact business that could in some cases stifle a business's growth. And so it's our responsibilities to make sure that that they're working and the processes that impact business are working. And then so what we do, if there's an issue that we discover, then it's our responsibility to come up with a common sense approach with how to fix the problem. And then we provide the governor and the legislature with a copy of the audit report with our findings, if there are any, and also with our recommendations on how to solve a problem. And those are things that we have audited over my administration several times, things that impact businesses across the Commonwealth. A lot of them could be locally, and a lot of them could ultimately impact the entire Commonwealth. But our job is to make sure that those programs are working. And the only way that we can find out if they're working is by talking to business leaders, but also talking to groups and organizations such as the PA Chamber.
How many of these audits are required? How many do you initiate via conversations with business leaders? Or perhaps do you receive tips from the general public as to things they would like to bring to your attention?
All the above. So one of the things that we do, and I'm very active with regards to going out into the community and also speaking to different groups. And we're constantly getting tips on certain issues. And a lot of those, we take all that information back to the office. First, we discover if we can, in fact, do the audit, because there's some audits that by law we're precluded from doing. But any group or organization, it could be the governor, it could be the legislature, it could be a private citizen. Anybody has the right to contact our office with regards to an issue that they may have. And one of the things that I promise, we will look at it to determine whether or not it's something that we should do and something that we can do. And because we are responsible ultimately there are 9,000 governmental entities. When I say governmental entities, it could be a state department, it could be a group organization receiving state funds, but we're responsible for 9,000 entities across the Commonwealth who receive state funds. And we produce over 3,700 audits per year. So there is a lot that we do. But anybody in the Commonwealth, if you have a concern about how taxpayer dollars are being spent, you can definitely contact our office and we will definitely get back to you. And if it's something that we can do, then it's something that we definitely will do.
General, you mentioned that no one, growing up, or maybe I'm paraphrasing, no one growing up thinks to themselves, I want to be an auditor when I grow up.
You got it right.
I know when
you got it right.
When I've asked my kids, what do they want to do when they grow up? I have not heard auditor. Although I will say, I think they there's some hidden auditing skills in my kids. I know when they're analyzing parental expenditures on each of them and comparing the two, I see some very intense auditing and oversight. But it occurs to me that you're also a major employer and hiring people, and how do you go about recruiting individuals to come and work for the Auditor General, and particularly as it may not be an obvious career path for younger Pennsylvanians thinking about what they want to do.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that we did was to create within human resources a workforce development team. And their job is to, number one, recruit from our PASSY schools. And as one of my staff said to me, if you think recruiting at a PASSY school is a common sense approach to a short-term staffing problem, you'd be correct. I mean, they're state schools, and we're a state department, so it makes sense for us to recruit at a PASSY school. So workforce development, they go to, we visited all 14 PASSY schools, and I say we, I was included. We attend PASSY career fairs, but also private college career fairs, where we talk to the students, we talk to the administration about careers within the Department of the Auditor General, because a lot of them really don't know what we do. And they hear the word auditing and they think that you're just looking at numbers all day. It's a lot more than that. We have 9 different bureaus. Each bureau is unique with regards to what it does. So we basically have to sell ourselves to the students and to the administration. So we go to them wherever they are. But we also create opportunities for them that may not have been there before. One of the things that we recently finished up last week was recruiting at community colleges. For years, the only way that you could become an auditor within a department, you would have to have a 4-year degree in accounting. And we felt that we needed to start thinking outside the box because of the uniqueness of the different bureaus. So we opened it up to not only accounting, but business, finance, risk management, IT, and anything business or math related. We open up opportunities for students at 4-year colleges, but also opportunities for students at community colleges as well. And I'm proud to say, I'm a graduate of Harrisburg Area Community College before I went to Penn. We just hired our first Pennsylvania community college graduate this past week. And so that is something and you're going to hear more about it later, but that's something I'm extremely proud of. So we've changed how we go about recruiting. And we also have a program called Internal Hire, which is available to any student who's at a 4-year institution, but also has recently graduated from a community college going into a 4-year college. And what the Internal Hire program is if you have a 2.5 GPA, and you get accepted into the program, you complete 900 intern hours, 900 intern hours, which could be done during the equivalent of 2 summers, or it could be done throughout the school year. And you complete those hours, you graduate with your bachelor's degree. At the end of that, you're going to have a job. So that's something that has been extremely successful. And the first year that we initiated that, we actually had more students across the Commonwealth apply for that program than we actually have employees. So that is probably one of our most successful programs. And we're going to hire as many interns as the departments can handle. So there's really no limit on the number of interns that we're going to hire. Just depends on what we can handle. So we've opened up a lot of career opportunities to our graduating students. The only requirement is that you have to be a Pennsylvania resident. If you're out of state and you're coming to a school in Pennsylvania, you have to live in Pennsylvania. Now, all our positions are remote. The internship positions are remote, and so are the employment positions are all remote. But the only requirement is that you have to live in the Commonwealth. And the Internal Hire program and the other programs through workforce development have been extremely successful. So in that way, we like to think that even though it's a small bit, we like to think that we're doing our job with regards to helping the economy here in Pennsylvania. Because if you have students who are living in a rural area and they end up coming to work for us, they're going to have a good paying job, and hopefully they'll set up roots wherever they are, buy a house, buy a car. They're going to be contributing to that local economy. And that's something that we wanted when we first put this together, because we recognize the financial impact of having students and having employees work remotely.
That's an excellent summation of the success that you found in hiring and filling jobs, particularly with Pennsylvania college students. What are some of the other successes that you would point to over the previous 3.5 years?
Well, there's a ton of them. There's a lot. I mean, I talked about workforce development and what workforce development does, which is the internal hire program, and also for recruitment as well. We've also, we felt that it was extremely important to break down the barriers of each bureau, and everybody kind of work from the same page. So we implemented and obtained new auditing software. And I'm proud to say that we are now, as far as our auditing working papers, we are now 100% paperless, which is something that we strive to do. And another thing that in addition to being paperless, another thing that the auditing software does, it makes it easier to manage your audits. When you think about the 100 pages of documents that are received for audits, and they could be all over the place. But what the auditing software does, it organizes everything, and it makes it easier for the auditors to work because everything's going to be organized. And another thing that we felt that was extremely important to do, like I said, there's 9,000 governmental entities that we're responsible for. We produce 3,700 audits a year. One of the things that we felt that we needed to do was to bring in best practices from the private sector. And because I audited in the private sector, and I know what's out there and I know what's available. So one of the things that we felt that we needed to do, there are some areas with regards to auditing where there may be no risk and no vulnerability. And you know that based on the information that you have on an entity that you're about to audit. So if there's no risk, no vulnerability, then you really don't necessarily have to perform an audit at that time. However, when you identify where there's high risk and vulnerability to the Commonwealth, then that definitely deserves a full-blown audit. And because of we're not spending as much time as for entities where there is no risk, no vulnerability, we can spend a lot more time with the entities where there is high risk and high vulnerability to the Commonwealth. And when I talk about areas where there's no risk and no vulnerability, I'm going to go back to an audit that we had to complete, that we completed a couple of years ago, where it was a program, First Chance Trust Fund, and the program is set up for children whose parents are incarcerated, and the program is funded through a contract with the Department of Corrections, and one of their contracts feeds that fund. Well, the contract that feeded the fund wasn't up yet for renewal, so they didn't have to put anything into this First Chance Fund, and there was $0 there. But we still had to audit that, and we audited going into it, that knowing that there were $0. If there's $0 that are in this program, why are you auditing it? There's no risk and no vulnerability. So that's what I'm talking about. When there's no risk and no vulnerability, you don't necessarily have to you don't necessarily have to do a full-blown audit, but areas where there are risk and vulnerabilities, you have to do that. And we do that by performing risk assessments of every single audit that we perform. And based on the risk assessment is going to determine whether or not there's high risk and high vulnerability. And another thing that that I'm very passionate about, and it doesn't necessarily go with our core functions, is financial literacy. I'm extremely passionate about it, always have been. And I'm proud to say that starting in school year 25-26, Pennsylvania is going to be the 25th state in the country to require some type of financial literacy be taught in to its graduating high school seniors. That's something, and I'm extremely proud to be part of that, because we've crisscrossed the state talking about the need for financial literacy. For individuals, and I'm talking about a lot of adults who don't understand basic checkbook math, and they're performing functions like for pensions and other organizations, I see that. And and for that reason, financial literacy, not only teaching kids, but also teaching adults, is extremely important to me, because if you don't understand it, you're going to see I'm going to see the mistakes that we're seeing in some of our audits. So we're very, very, very proud to be part of history. We performed our pharmacy benefit manager audit. I'm sure you may have heard about that, where pharmacy benefit managers were not being transparent to the Commonwealth with regards to the fees that they are charging independent pharmacies. And because of these fees, these hidden and undisclosed fees, approximately, in the numbers, anywhere between 150 and 200 independent pharmacies across the Commonwealth have gone out of business. And if you talk to these independent pharmacies, it's these fees on top of fees that are driving them out of business. They want to serve a very vulnerable population. When I say vulnerable population, I'm talking about Medicaid. So our audit was on Medicaid pharmacy benefit managers. And whenever a independent pharmacy would be filling a prescription for a Medicaid recipient, they'd be losing money. And so a lot of them are going out of business. And then, so because of them going out of business, who was going to be hurt? The people that we swore to protect. So we performed an audit where we looked at these fees. And these fees are being charged to independent pharmacies, and these fees are not being reported to the Department of Human Services and are not being reported to managed care organizations. They're hidden. So we looked at that, and hopefully the legislature will act on it. And I understand that pharmacy benefit managers have a business that they have to run. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you are not transparent and that you make your money off of the backs of these independent pharmacies who are serving Medicaid recipients. And those are just some of them. And you also are probably aware that we are in the process of performing audits of Pennsylvania cyber schools as well for reserves. That one's going to be coming out shortly as well. So there's a lot that's currently going on.
General, I think I guess final question from me, pivoting from reflecting on the last 4 years and thinking about potentially four more years if the voters of Pennsylvania send you back to the office of the Auditor General, and maybe you're not authorized to preview other areas of state government that you would, be interested in reviewing or auditing, but any insight to, how you think about potentially for more years, what you might look at either as either within the office or other areas to audit?
Well, I'll tell you, and you brought up a really good point. There are some areas that we are not permitted to audit. One of those areas was pharmacy benefit managers. And what we did was we worked with the legislature on legislation requiring us to do that. So if there's an area that we want to look at and we feel that's important for us to look at, then we'll work with the legislature for that. But another thing that we will continue to do for any new programs that are out there, we're going to continue to audit those. Number one, to make sure that they're working. I mean, one of the things that really disappoints me is whenever we perform an audit, it's like one side of the aisle is extremely happy, one side of the aisle is extremely angry. And we are just simply trying to do our job. audits should not be perceived as a weapon, even though people perceive them as a weapon. I don't know when that started. I don't know how that started, but that's not the truth. But what they are, it's a tool for government to make sure that, number one, our tax dollars are being spent the way they're supposed to be spent, and number two, the programs that are being paid for by tax dollars are in fact working, and that's our purpose. So those are some of the things that we're going to continue to do. Another thing that we're going to look at, and we feel that there's a need for a forensic audit bureau, because right now it's an area where it's kind of like a gray area, where we see some issues where there may be a crime may have been committed, but it's not enough information to hand to law enforcement. So we need to do a little further digging and get into forensics. And that's something that we're definitely going to do as far as opening up a forensic audit bureau. And I don't know what we're going to call it. That's something that we're definitely going to do, in term number two, because we just see the need, But also in the changes that we've made, everything I've talked about, again, it's not just for this administration, it's for administrations to follow.
And my final question also talks about perhaps future plans for an audit as we roll into Election Day on November 5th. Is there been any talk in your office or maybe with auditor generals around the nation about having an audit of the Commonwealth's voter rolls? A lot of discussion about ERIC and the system of making sure that registered voters aren't registered twice, registered out of state, in state. Is that a possibility? Is that within the AG's purview?
That's something of course, we hear about it constantly. I can tell you the one thing that we're looking at, as far as the voter registration, the motor vehicle voter registration, that's something that we're currently looking at. As far as any other audits, and that audit will be done probably sometime in the spring, sometime late spring. But one of the things that we constantly do, we constantly talk to other states about some of the things that they're doing, and each state is different. But as far as looking at the voter rolls, that isn't something that we've discussed, and it's not something that not quite sure if that's something that we're currently going to do. But we're going to finish the current audit of the vehicle voter registration, and we're going to finish that. And after that, we'll see what else is going on. We have some audits lined up, as you can imagine, we always do. One of them is the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Association. So that's one that we recently started. So, but to answer your question, I don't know. It's not something that we had initially thought about.
You're listening to the Keystone Candidate Forum, courtesy of Politics PA, Broad and Liberty, and the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're talking with Pennsylvania's Auditor General, Tim DeFoor, a candidate for a second term on the Republican ticket. And General, is there anything else that you want to make sure that we cover before we wrap things up today?
No, I think your questions are great. And look, to the people, to your viewers, I mean, I've spent my entire career doing one thing, and that's making sure that your tax dollars are being spent the way they're supposed to be spent. Again, I actually care about government. And that's why I ran for this office, because I want to make sure that the integrity of our tax dollars stays intact and that government is working the way it's supposed to work. And I know it takes more than one person to do that. But if I can impact government in any way, in a positive way, while at the same time providing a future to a young college graduate, and that's what I hope to continue to do.
The Auditor General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Tim DeFoor, thank you very much for joining us today on the Keystone Candidate Forum. For Alex Halper, the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, my name is Steve Ulrich from Politics PA. Thank you for joining us today. For Politics PA and Broad and Liberty, this is the Keystone Candidate Forum. My name is Steve Ulrich, joined by Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs at Pennsylvania Chamber, Alex Halper. We had the opportunity to speak to Auditor General Tim DeFoor earlier. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, I think Auditor General DeFoor has approached the last 4 years as Auditor General in kind of an unusual way for that position. And by that, I mean, he has, really almost kept his head down and just gone about the business of the office. We have frequently seen, not to disparage this kind of approach, but the office of the Auditor General in the past has been viewed as potentially a launching pad to other offices or running for other offices, and sometimes you sort of see that in the individuals who have been in that position. And in this case, you got someone who has cut his teeth auditing and is literally has a career in auditing, and that's the work he's done. So it's he's been a little bit unusual in that sense, and he appears to be approaching this campaign for re-election in very much the same way, focusing on the audits that he and his team have performed over the last 4 years and how they're going to continue that into the future.
I think some people certainly lean into his experience, as he mentioned, former Dauphin County Controller, running the State Auditor General office for the last 4 years, versus his opponent, State Representative Malcom Kenyatta, who doesn't have that experience. Certainly, running a state agency doesn't necessarily require all those requirements, but it does seem that Tim DeFoor certainly has the background and experience and has cut his teeth and pretty much explained how he is working for the taxpayers of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I did get from him a real passion for auditing. And I'm not sure how often in history that phrase has been uttered. I thought it was kind of funny, self-effacing a bit for him to talk about kids. No one grows up saying, "I want to be an auditor," even though that's what he's spent most of his career doing. But I appreciate how he does seem passionate about it, and he recognizes the importance of the work of that office in a Pennsylvania being managed and run well and utilizing taxpayer dollars in a responsible way and in the way that they're intended to be used. So I don't know. I think for the first time ever, I've gotten a little bit fired up about auditing. So we'll see if other Pennsylvanians feel the same way.
Well, I think the first question that anyone asks is, what does an Auditor General do? And what we heard from Mr. DeFoor is a lot of different things, including hiring Pennsylvania State College graduates. And I think that's lost among most people, not realizing how many college graduates leaving PASHE schools end up working for the Auditor General's office. I was impressed by that.
Yeah, I would agree. I as a statewide association representing businesses, as we discussed during the call, we talk to employers all the time struggling with hiring and filling open positions and other workforce challenges. So yes, he is an elected official, the Auditor General, but he's also a large employer. And to hear his perspective on how they've attempted to address workforce challenges that they're experiencing, I thought was interesting. And his educational path, going to community college, experiencing different types of schools. He went to the University of Pittsburgh, and he seems to understand that looking at a wide range of different types of candidates for open positions is not only necessary but maybe a good practice for an employer.
I think one of the great things about this forum and this setting and working with the Pennsylvania Chamber is the fact that so much oxygen is being sucked out of the room by the presidential race. How many Pennsylvanians really know what remains down ballot? So you kind of ask yourself, is Tim DeFoor benefited by having a record that he can run on, that he's the incumbent? Or is the record lost because of all the attention that's paid to the top of the ticket with the presidential race?
Yeah, it is. It is a fascinating question, and we won't have the answer until November 6th, I guess, or the days, hopefully just days or weeks following the election. But you're absolutely right, and whether it's treasurer or attorney general or auditor general, those state row offices, it is a huge challenge to get any attention from voters on those races. Between the presidential election, we have a high-profile U.S. Senate race. We have competitive congressional races, and of course, the state legislature, which is very tight and a lot of races grabbing it. But these are important positions, and they make a big difference in the lives of Pennsylvanians and the operations of state government, and really do deserve attention from the public and from voters. So I do hope through these conversations we're able to shed a little bit of light on the work that these offices do and the candidates who are running for them.
We did reach out to the offices of State Representative Malcom Kenyatta, the Democratic candidate for Auditor General, but as of recording date, we have not heard back from the campaign. My thanks to Alex Halper, Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. For Alex, I'm Steve Ulrich, Managing Editor of Politics PA. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of the Keystone Candidate Forum.